welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. Thank you all again for taking the time to come back and join me. We've got a great show for you this week, something I haven't done in way too long, and I feel like I say that every time I sit down with a co-host to do one of these, which is going to be a recommendations episode. In fact, it was February of this year, way back on episode 128, the last time I did a recommendations episode. So we're back here now on episode 143 doing the same again. So before I introduce, though, my co-host and tell you about the format for our recommendation show, I want to take just a quick moment and thank a few folks, of course, starting out with the few, the proud, the awesome, the wonderful people who support the Podcast Digest directly on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. You can make sure this thing continues, and I thank you all very much for doing so. If you love what you hear, there's a link in the show notes, and I greatly appreciate it. And I also want to thank this week's show sponsor. Today's podcast brought to you by Podbean, podcast hosting and monetization. It's the easiest way to start podcasting, or if you're looking for a new home for your show, go to podbean.com/TPD, learn more, and you will get your first month free. I'll tell you a little bit more about this week's sponsor, Podbean, in just a little while. But let's get on to this week's show, a recommendation show, folks. We're going to kind of relax a little bit, take a breath, and tell you about some great shows. You're going to come out of this with at least 4 great, awesome shows to recommend, and I'm only going to be providing half of that information. And I've been very fortunate to be joined by a longtime podcasting acquaintance, a co-host on numerous shows, a blogger, and just an all-around super cool person. My co-host for episode 143, this recommendation show, is Stefanie Muniz. I messed it up. Muniz. Stefanie Muniz from Gotham Lights podcast, from Brain to Keyboard, www.braintokeyboard.com for her writings. And I'm thrilled to talk podcasting with her. So, Stefanie, first time, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Well, I mentioned them briefly, but I want you to tell folks what it is that you do, what it is that your connection to the wonderful world of podcasting is.
I am the co-host of the Gotham Lights podcast. It is a fan cast for the Fox TV show Gotham. So, of course, we discuss everything related to Gotham, the TV show, even some Batman-related things, the movies, comics, that sort of thing. We do have guests on occasionally. And so that's what we do. My co-host Henno and I do that show together and have been since the beginning of Gotham. So 3 years now with the 3 seasons of the show.
And your blog?
And the blog I have, it's basically just things that interest me. So certain movies, books, things that happen in my life, like vacations and things like that. That is from Brain to Keyboard. And so that can, as you said, be found from braintokeyboard.com.
I'm glad I got that website right. And I didn't even do that. I hadn't even gone to it or wrote it down or anything. I did strictly off memory stuff. I just want that to be clear. I do remember that. I have it bookmarked in my Chrome browser. So
good job.
I check it regularly. So I enjoy your writing. I enjoy your podcasting, and you are a regular appearer on several different shows as a guest, and a lot of the independent podcast community, at least the circles that we both circulate in, would be familiar with you. So it's great to have you. It's great to talk to you. The first time, I believe, if memory serves me, you and I have been on the same show.
Yes, it has.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about then, being that as the case. And so, folks who are just tuning in for the first time, this is a curveball, a change of pace from your normal The Podcast Digest show. Normally, I focus in on long-form interviews with hosts and creators, but every once in a while, I used to do them about every 8 to 10 episodes, but now I'm more like, 12 to 15 episodes or so. I ask a co-host to join me, so I'm not necessarily going to be interviewing Steph, although I will ask her a few more questions. But what I'll be doing is actually asking her to join me in the idea of sharing with you great shows that both her and I listen to, and things that we found out. And as is typical format, she has not shared with me what shows that she has listened to. I've not shared with her the shows that I'll be recommending. So all of you will hear it at the same time. But before we get into the recommendation list, I always like to open these with kind of a casual conversation on a topic that sort of affects the world of podcasting, be it as a listener or a host and producer, what have you. And one of the things we kind of bantered back and forth a few different topics, and I realized there's something that I've never covered before on the Podcast Digest, and that is the idea of podfading. So what does that mean, folks? What is that term? Maybe it's the first time you're ever hearing about it. Basically, what this is the idea when a show gets retired or put on permanent hiatus, if you will, due to any number of reasons. And this can be a thing. This can be a thing for a host or creator, or it could be, a thing for listeners, usually a disappointing thing for all those folks. But it's a real thing, and it happens all the time. I mean, there's probably something I've mentioned on the show before that you guys may have heard about, the magic 7 or 8 episodes that once you pass that, like, I don't know what it is, like 50% of shows that get launched never make it past episode 8 or whatever that number is. It's a thing, and consistency and longevity is not all that common very often. So I kind of wanted to sort of talk about that a little bit. And Steph, I know you've been a co-host on shows that are no longer with us, and I know that you've also been a witness to other shows that have retired at some point or another. But just generally speaking, what's your feelings on shows that end up ending?
Well, I know, first off, that there were probably quite a few people that cringed at the H-word, hiatus. It's definitely a word that you don't like to hear as a listener, as a co-host, as a host of a podcast, because you usually are doing a podcast because you like to do it. It's something that you enjoy doing, and it's hard to imagine not doing it, especially if you've been doing it for a while. So for me personally, anytime I see a show end, it makes me a little sad, especially shows that I know of people who are friends, who I've become friends with because of podcasting. When I see them no longer having episodes pop up on my feed, because even though I have my own show, I started out as just a podcast listener and eventually graduated from there. So there are a lot of shows that I still listen to, and anytime one ends, it's a little bit sad, and you understand why certain people can't continue on with certain shows, and it's just a reality that happens in the podcasting realm. And then eventually, through time, you move on and have other shows fill those slots.
Yeah, it is definitely sad, especially when, maybe your replacement still leaves you longing for the original that held that subscription slot for you, if you will. And it is tough. And to be clear, we see this at all levels, right?
Correct.
Obviously, it's rampant in independents and small shows. But even in a lot of the big networks, you will still see some stuff like this happen. I mean, I think one of the things that is most famous, especially in recent memory, the one that really kind of set the podcasting world on fire there for a little while, that comes to mind, is with Gimlet Media and Mystery Show, where that show did one season and 6 episodes and then retired, and that was it. That was the end of Mystery Show, and it was a kind of big deal. There was a lot of sort of gossip around it and how it happened, and and so on and so forth. So this is not, obviously it's common with small indies, but this happens sort of in the I also think, again, Gimlet Sampler with Brittany Lewis, who was a sibling show to mine, if you will, in terms of featuring a great podcast. That one retired or pod faded, if you will. So it sort of happens at all levels.
Oh, definitely. It's across the board. And it's interesting when you see a show drop off with no warning and no notice. It kind of shocks you at first. Because especially if you've been listening to a show for a while, your immediate reaction is, oh, is everything okay? Did something happen? And you feel concerned, because one of the things, and I've discussed it with others, is when you listen to a show for a long enough time, you almost feel that you know these people really well, and with some you even form friendships. So when something happens so abruptly, you get concerned, and it's always more of a relief when someone says, okay, we've been doing this for a while, just wanted to let everybody know we're going to be stopping for a while, and whether that's permanently or not, it's just something that we have to do, and they either give reasons or just say it's for personal reasons, and then it makes it a little bit easier. But it can be a hard thing, and like you said, it happens across the board with the big names and some of the smaller indie podcasts that we fall into. And I know that even I've had big podcasts where they were, I think one of them from recent memory was a branch off of Nerdist, where one of the folks that work with Nerdist had a fan cast on a specific TV show. I listened to it all the time because I watched that specific show, and then all of a sudden they stopped. They didn't come back, even though the show did. And there wasn't really much mention of why. It just they either didn't feel that it garnered enough to continue it. Maybe they didn't have a big enough listenership. It's hard to say, but there's definitely different reasons and different scenarios and things that come about or cause a pod to fade.
Yeah, and it's a challenging thing, and I will tell everyone that this was sort of something I'd suggested that I wanted to digress with Stefanie on, because those eagle-eyed listeners that listened to the end of my last episode 142, which was the first ever rerun that I've ever put out there, my conversation with Roman Mars from 99% Invisible and Radiotopia, that I truly feel is one of my favorite conversations ever. And Roman is a true idol of mine in terms of audio storytelling and interviewing and so on and so forth. So I really thought it was valuable to any new arrival to have a listen to. That said, it was also the first time I ever did that. And why did I do that? Well, it was booking and scheduling, and it was because sort of personal life had gotten in the way of the time and routine and the reaching out that I'd regularly done to be able to produce this show each week. And, I've told folks this many times, regular listeners of TPD know this. You're listening to TPD in the sense that it's all me. The listening, the research, the emails to arrange interviews, the scheduling, the editing, the publishing, the promotion. I am a one-man band, which means I have a day job. Yes, folks, I love Podbean and I love Fireside when they were with me. But, that doesn't pay the mortgage, folks, just to be clear. But it does, necessitate me spending a lot of time, hours, and effort to produce this show each week. And lately, it hasn't been as easy due to things going on with my day job and personal life and so on and so forth. So I'm doing my best to kind of keep the ship afloat. And so at the end of last episode, I asked sort of, what do you guys want me to do? Do you want me to switch to bi-weekly, go on hiatus? There's that word, Steph. Or kind of, fill things in with reruns. We sit here now. Folks who are listening to this live, we are having this conversation on Friday, May 19th, the evening that the previous episode was published on the previous Sunday. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is that in the outro of that interview, I explained a lot of what I'm telling you now, folks, in that outro, and asked folks for feedback. And I want to just say this. I got none. 0 tweets, emails, comments, anything on what I think is sort of this quandary I'm finding myself in. And that hurt a bit, in the sense that I feel as if I'm sort of at a crossroads with the show right now, in terms of the time, effort, and what's all needed to kind of keep this ship afloat, with the context of listener feedback and input and sort of thoughts on what to do next. So that's why the idea, I don't think the Podcast Digest is fading. I do think it's kind of in a phase right now where it's likely to undergo some change. I just don't know what that change should be, and I would really appreciate folks' input. So I've been going on too long, Steph, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there, sort of the personal side of this discussion topic.
Sure, no, and that's no problem. It's funny that you mentioned the fact that you had your first ever rerun of an episode, because there are podcasts that I listen to that do that exact same thing. Either they have a conflict with their personal lives with work, or maybe they had a guest lined up that then something happened and they weren't able to record. So there are quite a few podcasts that I listen to that will post a rerun. And I will admit I'm guilty of, if I see that it's a show I've already listened to, I won't listen to it again. So I'll just move on. Especially, I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts. So if it's a rerun, I'll use that time for another one and try to listen to a little bit more so I could either catch up or stay ahead and not fall behind too far on certain podcasts.
Yeah.
But it's interesting as far as this is your first ever rerun episode, and you would almost think that would be a flag for people to go, oh, he's actually got a rerun. This isn't a live episode. I wonder what's going on with this, and maybe look into what are the show notes on this episode. Is there anything that I need to particularly pay attention to? And if they would click on it, they would hear maybe a different intro, and maybe even have something different with the episode that makes it a little different so that you can re-listen to it. And like you said, it's perfect for new listeners if they don't have time to go through the entire back catalog of an episode, which I have done a few times. And depending on how many episodes you have to go through, I would recommend or not recommend doing that.
A lot of work.
Yeah. But it's kind of crazy that, especially if you have listeners that have been listening for a while, that not anyone would say anything. I can definitely see how that would be a little disheartening, because you expect a certain feedback that you get with certain shows, and I know this as well from our show. Sometimes we'll get a ton of feedback, and other times it'll be crickets, and we won't really hear much.
Right.
And sometimes it's like, okay, well, there wasn't too much that we were discussing, or we see it more when Gotham is on break, because then there's really no reason to have a podcast episode. So we try to put out content, but then we don't really expect too much feedback, because there's nothing going on other than we might have some special episodes where we talk about Batman comics or something Gotham related, maybe do a little bit of fan stuff where they can do little contests or things. I know that for us, we did a contest during the first season that went well. We had a lot of interaction. We tried to do a second contest and got barely no responses. We got a few, and we looked at it and went, well, I guess maybe it's the type of contest. We wanted them to kind of write in just a short response about how they felt about Gotham and what they would say to someone who maybe gave up on the show early on to try and get them back in. And we thought that would be great to hear from people and see what they would say to others. And I guess that maybe was too frightening for people to put into words, because we got nothing. So that was interesting. But so I at least know how you feel.
Well, listener interaction on the whole can be an oddity, right? I believe some of you out there listening right now are the X% that will always tweet at the show producers or hosts, or send emails, whatever the case may be. But the fact of the matter is, and research shows this, that a majority of you just keep listening. And to be fair, I'm in that majority, right? I subscribe to over 100 shows regularly, and that number rotates all the time. I'm switching shows in and out. And I don't email all those shows. I don't tweet at all those shows. So I get it. I don't blame you. But I think that what we're sort of driving at is that there are crossroads, right? If Gotham Lights runs a contest or TPD asks for feedback, there are these certain crossroads where the hosts and producers of the shows you love, folks, really want or need to hear from you at one time or another. And maybe that's sort of the bottom line of this conversation, is that, like you said, Steph, and I agree, because I've been in that situation as well. Plenty of times where we see a show not come back, fade, end abruptly, or even end with an announcement, and we feel, disappointed that maybe, just maybe, if more folks had shared their enthusiasm or their appreciation or their admiration for the work being done, maybe that event wouldn't have happened. And I think that's sort of the bottom line of what I feel is important in this conversation is, folks listening, if you love any show, Gotham Lights, the Podcast Digest, or anything else in your subscription list right now, let them know. Social media, email, whatever the case may be. It matters. It truly, really, honestly matters. You would agree?
I would definitely agree, and especially for shows like ours that are of the indie variety, you almost, I don't want to say depend on the feedback, but it's something that is definitely great to have. And there have been shows that I know of where they were getting feedback, but it was feedback from people they felt they knew really well. And while they trusted their feedback, they wanted to hear from people who were outside of their circle or outside of their family
Right.
and friends, where they could feel like they're getting honest feedback, and they weren't getting that, and felt that, then maybe they don't really need to continue. Or if the feedback they were getting from those outside wasn't exactly what they were wanting, then was it right to keep going? So I definitely agree with that, where, and even the bigger shows too, if they get feedback, they appreciate it and they let people know that. There are quite a few shows I listen to where they may not be able to respond back to every comment they receive, but they will say on their shows, oh, we received feedback from people, they said something to this effect or that effect, and we greatly appreciate hearing from you. And then they would discuss whatever it was, either the question or comment that was made, and then move on. And I know there are certain shows that really make an effort to try and respond to people. Anytime someone says, oh, this episode was so great, or this guest was awesome, and you should try to get more people like this or have more content like this. And if the creator of the show reaches out to you, you get really excited because you feel that they're listening as well. You're listening to their show, but they're listening to you and value your feedback. And that's really great as a podcast listener to have that sort of relationship with a show. And yes, the bigger shows, they don't always have that time, and you understand that. But I think that's one thing that I personally love about the indie podcasts, is that you do have that chance to interact with the hosts of the shows that you listen to. Because this is something that they do as a passion project. Usually, it's not their day job as much as a lot of us would love it to be, and they do it because they love doing it and they love interacting with people, because it's a medium that really lends itself to that.
Yeah, no, all great points, and you're absolutely correct. And I think sort of the bottom line here is that, pod fading is the thing. It happens for any number of reasons. And I want to be clear that neither Steph nor I are saying that the reason that they happen is due to lack of feedback. They can happen due to reasons from, one's personal life, time, interest, cost, whatever the reason. There are all number of reasons that a show may be retired or pod fade, if you will. But the point is that irregardless of the ultimate cause of that fade, if you love something, tell them. And I think that's important, because that can go a particular distance to influence one's decisions. So, but that's our discussion topic. We went on a good bit, but it was a great discussion. I really appreciate your input, Steph. A lot of great points. And but what we need to do now is to get to the crux, the core of what we're doing this week. It is a recommendations show here on the Podcast Digest, so it's time to do exactly that. So we've got 2 shows each in our queue. Steph, would you like to go first, or would you like me to set the example?
Why don't you go first?
Sure. You know what's funny is I ask that every time, and that's the exact same answer. Each and every person gives to me each and every time. So that's fine. It works for me. So let's get to my first recommendation this week. And folks, to be clear, I try very hard to make sure that this is not a show that I've previously interviewed a host of, or even mentioned on a previous recommendation show. So this is something brand new and appropriate right now, given sort of some of the allusions I've been making in the last 2 episodes about my current life situation. So my first show recommendation this week is a show from very good friends of mine. I'll be honest about this. This network has been very good to me, and they've been very forthcoming in terms of making a lot of their hosts available. And this is a show that took me a few weeks to warm to, but now that I've sort of gotten in the groove, I really like it. It's been around since April 3rd of 2017. It's from Wondery, and it's called I Hate My Boss. Yes, indeed. This is a completely different kind of show for Wondery, and a completely different kind of show, I think, than most folks have heard. This is hosted by Liz Dolan and Larry Seal. Both of these hosts have long-term experience in the corporate America, if you will. And what this show does through a couple of different ways, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, because it's not your typical show. It's not a call-in show. It's not an advice help show. It's not a fictional show. It's sort of all of those things. And what I mean by this is that they have multiple different episodes through their first season that sort of cover each and every one of those. Both of the hosts, both Larry and Liz, will sort of give you their observations, their input, their prior experience and wisdom in facing a lot of the situations that one may commonly face in the workplace. But they also intertwine their experiences with a fictional story of a made-up company called Pen and Pencil, and they sort of use the writing and the acting in this fictional story to sort of realistically portray actual situations I know myself personally I've heard in the corporate environment from my day job. And then as they kind of, the story sort of crosses those situations, then break them down in terms of what this individual character may want to do or how they may want to approach this situation. And then they have even yet other episodes, regular episodes, as well as what they're now calling after hours, where they're taking listener questions and emails and voicemails on situations that that those folks are actually in, and giving them, their input. And if you are in, especially if you're in a corporate world, I always harken back to one of my favorite movies of the mid-90s, Office Space. If you sort of feel that lifestyle where, you're a cog in the wheel, or you're mid-level management, or whatever the case may be, listening to I Hate My Boss from Wondery sort of gives you this concept that you're not the only one out there. You are you're a part of the masses, and other people are suffering just like you. And even better, what Liz and Larry are saying often kind of resonates and sort of makes sense. And on at least 2 occasions listening to this series so far, it's sort of made me think, that might actually be applicable to me in a way that I might think about something differently moving forward. So when you can be entertained, listen to, voices of experience, and sort of find some applicability to your own life, that's a show I want to recommend. So it's called I Hate My Boss from Wondery. Search it in your app of choice. You'll find it. There's some good stuff in there, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So that's my first recommendation. So, Steph, have you ever heard of I Hate My Boss?
I have not, no, but it definitely sounds interesting.
It is super interesting. Is that your day job? Are you kind of in the corporate world?
I am in the corporate world, yes. I'm a worker bee in a cubicle, but I have to say I've been very fortunate. I've been at the same job for going on 10 years next month. And I have always had really good bosses, and for a large portion, I would probably say the last 6 or 7 years, I've had the same boss who I absolutely love and refused to accept any sort of promotions if it meant leaving her team. So I basically just waited until there were promotions on the team. Yeah.
To be fair, and I should mention this isn't like a show that episode after episode just trashes one's boss, right? It really addresses a lot of different sort of corporate issues that for example, they're about to start and work on a series on sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. They talk a lot about, they had a recent episode on working in a family business. So if, there's the parent and then the son works there, and then you fall out of favor with the son, how do you handle that situation? And so it's not just necessarily about some kind of evil boss, it sort of winds in a lot of different, they had a great after hours episode recently on somebody who asked about, I do all these great things, but sometimes I worry about, does anybody know about it? And should I tell folks or should I not? Or why does my boss always ask me, so what are you working on? And what's the point of that? And so it's not just about hammering on one's boss, but it is a catchy title, but they do go into a lot of different areas. So
right, and that's if you work in a corporate field, you definitely have a lot of different scenarios and things that can happen to you rather than just your boss. You deal with customers and suppliers and all sorts of people and businesses. So there's definitely, if you are in that type of field, and they do go over all of these different variety of things, there's definitely going to be something in there that people can relate to.
Yeah, it's a cool show. Highly recommend it, folks. So that is my first recommendation. I Hate My Boss from Wondery. Check them out. So I'm going to pass the talking stick now to Steph. So what is your first recommendation, Steph?
My first recommendation is a podcast called Fantastic Geek. They do a variety of different shows, and they have been one that I've been listening to many, many years. It's funny, I can link my origin of indie podcasts to 3 podcasts, and this is one of them. And I've always loved their tagline. They're your official, unofficial voice of the Marvel Cinematic Community. So they do a lot of things involving Marvel. So Marvel properties they do, which is where I first got into them, was an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast when that show first started. And so I've been listening to that from the beginning. And then every other Marvel show that has come out since then, they have done a podcast on. So they're definitely in that fan cast realm where they will discuss the episodes, break them down, give critique on the episodes, and then throw in fun little news and information on the shows themselves, on the actors. Because it's Fantastic Geek, they do other geek-related things like movie reviews, and they'll go to New York Comic-Con. Both of the guys, Matt and Pete, who do the show, are from New Jersey, so they will often go. That's their main Comic-Con convention, is the big New York Comic-Con. So they'll often do shows from them traveling there and panels that they go to see. So it's great that they have so much different material that you can get into, and then they've branched out to other things as well, as far as the new Star Trek show that's coming up, and they've done all of the Marvel shows on Netflix. They do all the Marvel movie reviews. So they definitely have something for everyone. So if you're not into just Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they did Agent Carter when that was still on. Of course, that show has since been canceled. They were about to do the show, I think it was Marvel's Most Wanted, which was canceled before it even started. So they definitely have that experience with shows that have faded away or stopped, because when you do a show that is contingent on material provided from a show you watch, if that show doesn't continue, neither can your podcast. So, but they've definitely had other things that they can fall back on, and I've always loved listening to them. As I said, they do a great job. They have fun little segments and little audio clips that they throw in there to make it real fun, and transitions and things. And I've communicated with Matt and Pete both on Twitter. They will gladly reach out and have a discussion with you on podcasts that they do or shows that they talk about. So I love that they will do that Twitter interaction. And I think they do have a Facebook that they will also talk to you on and things like that. So definitely recommend them highly for any Marvel fans out there.
And one more time, the name?
Fantastic Geek, and it's actually fantastic with a PH.
There you go. Well, that's pretty fantastic. That's for sure. Fantastic Geek. Wow. So they've kind of run through. Is it sort of a revolving focus on different shows as time goes along, or do they kind of cover the whole umbrella of all things geek?
They cover the whole umbrella with the more of a focus on Marvel things. But like I said, they have recently branched out to other things, but more everything related to Marvel, and they'll go season after season of a show, episode after episode of breakdowns and discussion. And then all of the movies they'll go see and review them as well, and put out specials for all the movies that they go see and do. And it's really interesting, and I've always enjoyed it.
Awesome. And of course, I should have mentioned this when I mentioned my first recommendation, but links, folks, to both of these shows and the next two we'll talk about in just a moment will be in the show notes as always. So we've got one more each to tell you about. But before I do that, folks, I do want to tell you a little bit more about this week's show sponsor. As I mentioned up front, this week's episode of the Podcast Digest is brought to you by my friends and awesome supporters, Podbean. Podbean offers podcast hosting and monetization. And, you know, when Podbean came back to the Podcast Digest, they told me, hey, look, there's so many new and awesome things going on we want to tell you about, and feel free to share them. And so I want to kind of hit a few of these highlights with you folks. YouTube publishing is up and live straight from Podbean. So I've been on YouTube for a little bit with the Podcast Digest, and listens will come from there. So if you want to be on YouTube and have your show there, I mean, think about it, folks. How many people do you know are on YouTube all the time, right? Everybody's on YouTube, and a lot of people now are listening to music on YouTube. Well, now they can listen to your podcast, and Podbean will help you publish straight to YouTube as well. And Podbean's monetization options are also getting increasingly popular. They've got a number of shows now that are sort of creating premium content. So maybe you put together a holiday special, or a special about a particular movie or release or content that is special to your regular release schedule. You can actually sell that for, say, 99 cents or $1.99 or something straight through Podbean. Podbean will allow you to do that. That's an included feature with all accounts at the unlimited level or above. And folks are using it for their Patreon program, right? So if you have patrons to support you directly, you can release episodes directly to those folks only. And this includes all of the regular features of Podbean that I've been telling you about for several months now, right? In terms of the customizable website or integration with your own domain already, all the RSS and iTunes support you need, and something I've been talking about a lot lately as well, being able to publish straight from their mobile application. You could be in the car, talk to your phone for a few minutes, and literally hit publish straight to a new episode of your podcast right through your RSS feed. Can be all done in the mobile Podbean application. All that and more is available through Podbean. So if you go to podbean.com/TPD, you'll get all the details on what I've been telling you about, as well as your first month for free. So, folks, check out Podbean if you're thinking about starting a show or looking for a new home with more tools for your current podcasts. So, my thanks to Podbean for supporting the Podcast Digest. Now, let's move on. Steph, let's talk about the second show that both of us have queued up to tell folks about that they should be subscribing to and listening to. And I've got a left field one for you. One way out in left field that I came across. And I should mention this because I don't know that I've ever mentioned this individual by name on my show before, and I feel like I should, so I'm going to. Joel Mandelkorn was a guy I went to high school with. All right, I'm 38 years old, so we went to high school in the mid-'90s. And Joel jet-setted out to the West Coast. He is a Hollywood, L.A. guy, and he's been running his own sort of monthly stand-up show and a side show as well. But his main effort is the Super Serious Show out in Culver City, California. And so he gets a lot of comedians to join him there. And so he's met a lot of folks in sort of LA, especially in the up-and-comer scene. So I believe it's through the Super Serious Show, he had met a couple of folks who have started their own podcast that he tweeted about a few weeks ago. And I subscribed to it, and I'm absolutely in love with this show. It is not necessarily new per se. It's been around, I believe, from what I can tell here. It's had about 85 episodes, and it's been around since August of 2015. But I'm not sure of the attention it's been given, because whatever level it is, it's not enough. They're only the show itself is only sporting about 400 followers on Twitter. but I subscribed to this when Joel tweeted about it, and it is one of my new favorites. And that's a strong statement in the sense that this is two people, comedians, literally just sort of talking about the week's goings on. So how many shows have you heard like that, Steph? Two people trying to be funny talking about the week's news. There's like a million of those shows, right?
Yeah, especially if you Google comedy or even in iTunes or whatever you listen to comedy podcast, you see a billion pop up.
Right. So for one to stand out matters. And here's the first way this show stood out. The name of the show is called The Angry Little Goats. Yes, like the animal. Angry Little Goats. The hosts are Eliza Skinner and Will Weldon. Okay, you probably haven't heard of either one of them yet. Eliza does have some work that you may have heard of. She is currently, if my research serves me correct, a writer with The Late Show with James Corden. She's also made appearances on the Pete Holmes Show, At Midnight, Chelsea Lately. She's been on Showtime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she's definitely done some things, but you may not know the name. And Will is also sort of in the same vein of made several appearances on several shows, but not a name you necessarily know yet. That said, listen to Angry Little Goats, and it is, at least by my appearance, exceptionally edited with a flow and a back and forth between these two that is, you just have to hear it to appreciate it. And, I probably should be honest about this. They definitely shy to the liberal side of the political spectrum, which I do as well. So I'm good with it. But if you don't, it may grate you a bit. But what they do is sort of talk about everything that's gone on in a week. It's not necessarily a political show per se. It's politics, pop culture, current events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just love listening to these two. These two have a back and forth that you don't hear in the radio podcasting world very often. I mean, you hear co-hosts that sort of get along and have a vibe, but then there's sort of like this next level, and Eliza and Will are on this sort of next level. It's really hard to explain because every episode's so different. They have occasional guests where it gets sort of like, a larger panel to diagnose the week and what have you. But most of the episodes are the two of them. And Angry Little Goats is a great listen if you just want this sort of comic relief, sort of relaxing kind of, you don't have to stress about a Radio Lab or This American Life serious deep dive topic. You just want something kind of light and casual. You will love Angry Little Goats. I promise you. So that's my second show recommendation. So I take it, Steph, have not heard of this show, yes?
I have not. My only context for Angry Little Goats would be YouTube videos, because I would find it hard to believe that nobody has seen videos float around of goats that kick each other over, goats, yeah, or are jumping over things and screaming, and it's adorable. So that in itself is really funny to watch. So I can only imagine. I
would assume their name, came from something along those lines.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that already has me intrigued right there.
It's a great listen. It's either right up your alley and you're going to love it, or it doesn't scratch that itch. One way or the other, I think it's worth checking out, folks, if my description sort of appeals to you. So that's my second show recommendation, Angry Little Goats. I love it. It's a nice little, it's like having candy in between, lunch and dinner. It's just a fun little diversion. It's a fun listen. So back to you with the talking stick again, Steph. Your second show recommendation.
All right. My second show recommendation is another fan cast. I know there's a theme. They are Supernatural: The Crossroads. And if the title doesn't give it away, it is a fan cast of the CW show Supernatural. It's been on for a really long time. It's one that if anyone knows me, knows I am a big fan of the show. So it was great to stumble upon this podcast a few years ago as well. They are all guys, which is rare in the Supernatural fandom world, where it's a majority is women. If you go to, because they do exist, Supernatural conventions, you're going to just find a whole lot of women and very few men. So it was great to stumble across a podcast that was about a show I loved, where it was three guys, and it is Thomas, Ryan, and Mike. And they actually do a variety of podcasts from Mike, who is the producer. He also is one of the co-hosts. He's usually around in most of the podcasts, but he does his main show called Rain Man. And so his company is Rain Man Digital Media. And so this falls under his little umbrella. So he's the producer. He does all the work, but is also there usually talking and discussing the episodes that they discuss for Supernatural, along with Thomas and Ryan, who are what you would consider more the main hosts, the co-hosts of the show itself. And they haven't actually been doing the podcast for very long. So they haven't been doing it since the beginning of Supernatural. So I think Supernatural might even precede podcasting, or at least the indie scene as it is now. But two of them, Thomas and Mike, have been watching the show for a very long time. Ryan came in a little bit later, much like I did, watched a whole bunch of shows on Netflix and caught up to the most recent things. And what I love about them is that they do such a great job of critical analysis on the episodes, and you can tell that they are really big fans of the show, where they're not going to sugarcoat things necessarily. They're going to tell it like it is, and I love that because it's honest. Yes, they love the show and they'll talk about all the good things about it, but they won't leave out things that they find that maybe could have been done better, or maybe suggest different ways it could have gone, or they would have liked to see it go. And that's what I really love. That's what I like to do with my podcast as well, with Gotham Lights, is if we didn't like something, we're going to say it, and we're not going to shy away from that, because that's all a part of being a fan of a show, is you sometimes have to take the good with the bad. And that's one thing that I love about them particularly, is they have such smart and great commentary to these shows, and I actually learn quite a lot. Two of them have a little bit of background in film, and they kind of use that to into their discussions to discuss the show, and it's great. They have had some of the guests that they've had actors from the show, so they've actually had some of the actors from Supernatural on the show as guests to discuss the show and their characters and things. So if you're a fan of Supernatural like I am, I would highly recommend Supernatural: The Crossroads.
This is exactly the reason why I wanted you to join me, Steph, because I'm not familiar, one, with that show, or two, even Supernatural as a whole. So it's one of what I try to do with asking folks to co-host with me on these recommendation episodes, is to tell folks about things that I may not personally be into, but are obviously great and awesome for those who are. And I want to make sure that word gets out. So I really appreciate you kind of, providing these synopsis of a couple of shows that I don't think ever would have gotten a mention on TPD, and now they have, and you've spoken so wonderfully about them, and I think that's awesome. So I really appreciate that. So if you're into that, folks, there's a couple great recommendations from Steph. So that'll do it. There are 4 episodes, or 4 shows put out there for you folks of varying different flavors that, I hope that you guys subscribe to, check out, listen to a few episodes of, and if you like them, share. But before we go, Stefanie, thank you very much for taking the time to join me this week.
Thank you very much for having me. I had a great time.
Awesome. One more time before we go, tell folks about Gotham Lights and From Brain to Keyboard, where they can find you, and anything else you want to tell folks about.
Sure. So Gotham Lights, you can find it on all your podcast apps that you use. We're on all of them. You can also reach us on Twitter at Gotham Lights. We also have a Facebook page. You can search Gotham Lights, or facebook.com/Gotham Lights. I can be found personally on Twitter at BadWolfBay87. You can reach me on there for any variety of things. If you want to talk geeky things or blogs or whatever, you can definitely reach me there. My blog,
or help make fun of Palmer on Twitter. Either way, right? Yes, yeah, we can do that too.
Always
yes.
Up for making fun of Palmer.
Exactly. Yeah.
And my blog can be found from braintokeyboard.com.
And I will have links, folks, as I mentioned, to Steph's blog, Steph's show, Steph's Twitter, all that fun stuff, link in the show notes, as always. So, Stefanie, once again, thank you very much for joining me, and I appreciate you helping me supply the Podcast Digest listeners with a lot of great shows.
You are very welcome.
Folks, that'll do it for this week here on the Podcast Digest. But before I go, I want to take just a quick moment and thank this week's show sponsor, which, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is Podbean. Folks, if you are looking to start your own podcast, maybe you're a super fan and want to get your own voice out there, or maybe you have a show already and looking for a brand new home, Podbean can help you out, especially if you go to podbean.com/TPD. You will get your first month for free just by signing up with that special URL. My thanks once again to Podbean for supporting the Podcast Digest. So until next week, folks, or maybe I should start saying until next episode. We'll see. Until next time for the Podcast Digest, my name's Dan Lizette, and I'll talk to you then.